23, marking a moment in our history where the regime is expecting to be celebrating 50 years of the state of emergency. The 1973 decree that also influenced a situation of an establishment of a dictatorship, which will be 50 years of an authoritarian rule of the monarchy and supported by capitalism. It will mean 50 years of a Tingunda capitalist, destruction of our economy, ruining of our population. It will mean also a moment of a life in which democracy in the country was replaced by a dictatorship. Therefore, it is important for us to make this reflection on the years. We have said sometimes about the question of how can such a state of emergency survive for half a century, and the circumstances were around practical objective conditions that existed in our country. Being a small country which matters very little in the world, and also with a small population that also can survive within an environment of backwardness. But over the years, things have changed. It has been a year of 50 years without an absence of struggles. The people of the country have been daily involved in struggles, and they were not qualitatively leading into any breakthrough for many reasons. One critical one was that the consciousness of our people have not risen beyond what the regime or what the ruling class in Swaziland will have offered. The country has been established by reinforcement of imperialist forces, including right-wing forces such as apartheid South Africa there. It has survived from this support and this understanding that Swaziland should remain a geopolitical site for their own climax to the world and how they interpret themselves, whether it's a rest camp whatsoever. But the truth is that Swaziland has always been inhabited by a population, and under the state of emergency, the population has been ruined, unable to grow on population size because of death due to curable diseases. Because not only that the authoritative regime of the monarchy has all harbored the land space for imperialism, but it has also presided over a population. Didn't destroy only the resources, plundered over the resources of our country, but that collaboration also have a negative effect to the lives of the people. We have to make these reflections. They are quite important as we enter the 50 years. It's a history of shame, but also it must give to us some hope, but also must channel us into some enthusiastic campaign work to bring about democracy, that whose only seeds have already been planted. The death of our people in the battlefield, in the picket lines, are the important component that defines that democracy in the country has been planted. The footprints are in existence, and we cannot lose sight of that. Otherwise, we will be failing to uphold to the historical challenges of class struggles. These circumstances we are faced in today make us to make strong points that there are characteristics today that makes us to stand and uphold to the hope that we can easily declare 2023 and April 12th as the period of the beginning of the struggle towards the establishment of the transitional authority. So it's an important phase of transitional life in our struggle. The most important signs that makes us to boldly confirm that is that the regime itself has lost authority. It has gone to an elastic reformist party or agenda. It cannot reform it anymore. Already there are practical signs that demonstrates clearly that the regime authority has always lost balance completely, to an extent that it has also introduced completely new and contradictory instruments of keeping its power. The one that defines a well criminal aspects of defining a state power. That foreign surrogate military forces could be introduced in the country to define the authority. And it is on conditions that there was no choices that the regime can offer or can award, other than to surrender power. If it still wants to cling to power, there's nothing to do but to just introduce this phenomenon of world crime. The conditions in the country clearly states that Swaziland is ungovernable under the dictatorship. The regime can't rule in the old way as stated, but also it cannot reform itself anywhere newer other than to cling to power and introduce to itself a new characteristic that foreign powers are now managing our country. Foreign powers in the formation of what the authority of Taiwan and also what apartheid remnants have been coordinated to define this kind of foreign power now in our country, to help survive an autocratic rule of a monarchical dynasty. And there are practical cases of the collapsing of the government facility, infrastructure, institution, and also the destruction of the personnel, which otherwise should be the critical people defending and maintaining the regime. Not even a single state official can boldly stand and confirm the policies of the regime, because day in and day out they are exposed as non-starter, fragmented to a point that some government departments are completely destroyed and they do not exist anymore. A critical example is that Nail, who is the Minister of Finance, who is now the trusted person to Mswati, plays all the departmental roles in the country. Recently, he has assumed the position of Minister of Agriculture, running around the country, advancing a very useless campaign of the dictatorship, of planting trees. The worst part is that he will go even into a community or in a village in the western part of the country that is extremely forested and claim he has to introduce a campaign of planting trees. As a Minister of Finance, he has overruled, he has overtaken the position of the Minister of Agriculture, because that ministry has nothing, has got no policy to advance in any form of running the agricultural or food production aspects of the economy, other than the forest industry where Nail dominates. This is one classical example that everything has gone out of control. The military in the country is no longer in control of the security of the state. Majority of them, even in high commands, some have now been bribed or bought back into the system or bought out of the system by Nail's administration, because there is a systematic revolt around army personnel, junior and senior officials, because of the conditions they are exposed to, the dangers and threats of their life, whereby in the country there are two parallel military institutions running the country. The one that defends Mswati under Nail and the entire system, and also the one that keeps up a shape whose only important aspects will be to terrorize the masses in the name of law and order, quoted by the 1973 decree. Those are very important but dangerous situations that we cannot live in these situations. People are shot at on a daily basis by the military parades that goes out and throughout the country as a method of intimidating and creating fear to suppress the democratic voices of our people. This has also been done not without challenges and not also without circumstances of exposure of failures, but in the main they demonstrate a condition of ungovernability of the country under the autocracy, confirmed by the very system itself. Recently we have heard that the regime through Mswati has banned churches from organizing Easter festivals. Mswati has done so because he fears not only those who have championed the struggles in the streets, but he fears everyone in the country because the democratic agenda is embraced within the entire masses of our people in all corners. It is true that churches are systematically organizing. The regime cannot and will not celebrate the 50 years. Already this science clearly states that there is nothing to celebrate, but the regime is now exposed into a state of qualifying its moribund status and therefore giving it necessary that the final push is now necessary. And it is necessary on the basis that it is about our survival. For us, prolonging a life of this nature, of a condition of ungovernability, means therefore that we will be creating a condition of extreme uncertainty. We are quite aware that diseases in the country continues to kill people, and on the other side, the health that is managed completely by the US government is also unable to attend to the health conditions of our country, confirming that even the imperialist forces that have always pledged to support the regime, but the conditions now are unworkable. It will be a disgrace to the US authority that in their campaign to claim to be helping countries, but in Swaziland they have full control of the health sector. Also, on the other side, go hand in hand with massive failures associated with high mortality rates, even by people who have space even to enter the doors of hospitals. So those are completely practical cases that explains the state of affairs under the dictatorship. Otherwise, governability will mean the policies and attitude and programs of the regime must be fulfilled. Under the Mswati autocracy in these 50 years, clearly there is nothing ticking. Everything is collapsing, even under those who are supporting the regime. Everything is a mess within those that stand up boldly to cover the regime, even under these circumstances of massive failure and open state of complete loss of control of an authority of the magnitude of a dictatorship. Therefore, it is important to make these practical reflections and make sure that we identify the areas of where is our role now. The point is that in the coalition with other countries to the agenda for democracy, economic development, and social justice, we create those important values in us because we can explain them and we can express them. That what kind of a democratic will define that says it has changed things upside down. It is that democratic system oriented to a democratic republic. Alienate anyone by belief and doesn't alienate anyone either by any form of background, educated or not educated. All of us must combine to define the destination of our country because it matters much to all of us. And therefore it is in that systematic way that we must assume to take charge. And when we take charge, we should not ignore the circumstances imposed by the danger of the dying authoritarian rule. That if it is not carefully claimed, it can also destroy not only the agenda, but can also destroy the people who are driving the agenda. Because this new agenda doesn't require any advice like the decree was. doesn't require any technocrats, as the decree was. It requires the contribution, systematical and robust involvement of the people holistically. And therefore, we need to make sure that this environment is being paved. The only threat to this environment, it is the attitude of the repressive regime using force to contain and curtail this new breakthrough. We must not be ashamed that a new struggling to be born will always face the circumstances of the dying which refuses to die. Therefore, we need to ensure that this new that must be born is in the side of history, and therefore it must be protected and must be worked out and nurtured to the point that through its survival, the dying must completely perish, and through its ashes, this new must be born. In a sense, we are trying to say that there is nowhere that a democratic agenda can be forged in the country without undermining and destroying the dying autocratic dictatorship. Today, as it is the 1st of March of April 2023, we must begin a plot that 12 April 2023 must mark the systematic, consolidated, highly integrated mission for the democratic transition in Swaziland. And it must also mark clearly that it is bred and it is organized and must be plotted within the conditions of the current state of affairs under the autocracy. Ungovernability is a condition necessary for a revolution. It must be fast-tracked because it is an infrastructure. It's a necessary condition that it helps the birth of the new and the dying from the dying of the old. If it combines these two processes, our duty now is to qualify it and make our systematic planning to the main. The regime is desperate to coordinate resources. It is now worried about how money is spent and how money it is on its own. It wants to use every cent to defend the autocracy, but it can't do so because it has oriented its cadres on corruption, and therefore they continue to participate in corrupt practices, corrupt activities, and then in the course, the very same regime will punish its own forces in that regards. These are very critical situations of the state of unworkable circumstances within the regime. It is biting itself, it is destroying its own livelihood. Corruption is the lifestyle of the regime. Whenever it wants to fight corruption, it will be fighting itself and digging its grave deeper. And we must accelerate those campaigns. We need to make sure that even the industries where the regime makes so much profits, we have heard that the sugar belt industry is now remain the pillar of the regime. And through the US trade of sugar, we will see that the regime gain massive resources. The US administration is still committed to help and keep the regime afloat by making sure that it supports its revenue base and will always commit itself to commit its agreements, trade agreements with the absolute power, even at this hour of moribund of its dead. And we must expose that and make sure that even the superpowers of the USA imperialist characteristics should not reap anything in an offensive campaign of the pro-democracy forces taking charge of the agenda for democracy in Swaziland and making sure that the country is ungovernable under the dictatorship. From April 12th, such kind of campaign must be magnified and must be treated as part and parcel of the attitude of the oppressed people, that in any communities, in every school, in every institution, it should not wait for any moment, that a strike must break up and the protest must emerge and the demands for democracy must be raised and the whole operations of this mechanism must be turned upside down. And we must make sure that we emphasize that any mission, whether socially, including Mswati's birthdays and his cultural activities, should be targeted for, including what he calls his festival of religious concoctions that he's trying to build in our country. The church must refuse that the religious infrastructure should be a weapon of oppression, should be one of the last lever that the regime will collapse with. The church people must divorce the church or service infrastructure from the dictatorship and make sure that people must exercise their right to worship under a free condition, and they must demand that freedom now. So we are expecting that these festivals, this festive season must also demonstrate that a church, as part of the pro-democracy forces, begin to set the tone agenda, market and continue to promote their independent church services in social media and other aspects, and continue to run this church service and continue to preach to the people the liberation theology that already is pregnant within the majority of the church people, church leaders in the country. This is not necessarily divorcing from the real agenda. Our country demands that all of us must do things abnormally, because we are now under a very abnormal situation, and we must create that case and make sure that youth militants continue to occupy the front line, and make sure that all aspects and the regime must be preoccupied by the militant political activities of the young people of our country, and they must do so with confidence and boldly. But they must also understand that as we continue to move forward and advance, it is necessary that we consolidate the resistance movement, and the resistance movement is the only capacity that can defend this mission, because the breadth of this democratic transition is within an organized society. So we need to make sure that the democratic movement, the resistance movement, must also qualify itself to the extent that it cannot allow itself to be destroyed. So no single activity without organization, without presenting the aspect of how we want to organize the new society, can survive. So we need to make sure that youth activism must combine with institutions, must also combine with structures, and must also have some form of a formation. That how best can the youth militancy attend to this crisis, to this situation of ruthlessness, of the combination of the right-wing security concoction that has been presented in the country Adam Swart. And you must accelerate those kind of campaign, advance this agenda in that systematic way, because through it, the aspects of the democratic transitional mission will already been born. And it must be known that it consolidates. It must have a shape of a life. It must assimilate a democratic society that must be built. We need to carry each other. We must attend to all the difficulties we are in a systematic way. Not to be afraid to deal with the problems of hunger, of diseases killing our people, of the insecurity in our country. We need to combine all those aspects and make sure that this resistance movement shoulders up this necessary component of the fight and its objective. Because this fight for democracy has an objective. It is not only destroying the old system, but it also plant the seeds of the new dispensation. And we must emphasize that it must be carefully studied, worked out, and confirmed within us in all rank and file. And as we unite and understand our diverse capacities, we must ensure that this is a maximum strength in our own condition of life, and temper everything that associate towards the strength of the dictatorship. In that case, we will be able to craft a way forward and make this year 2023 a year for the pro-democracy movement to champion the cause of struggle for the democratic dispensation. It's a transitional phase which will not in any case be associated with all the elements of the ruin of the old. It must define its own new path. It must define its own new institutional base. It must also confirm its own new targets of the lifestyle. Our democracy must end poverty, must end the death of our people, must also change the outlook of our country in terms of settlements and all other habits. It must uplift the people of Swaziland in the world to be people of modern society who also appreciate science, who appreciate development, and who appreciate progress. That kind of orientation must be founded in the course of the year, and you must make sure that as today it is the 1st of April, a month that confirms the disaster of the 50 years, but today we need to change it to be also the month whereby the crafting of the new formula for a democratic dispensation is comprehensively declared. And in the end of the month, we should all be carefully clear that May Day 2021 must make workers to confirm that this path has been forged and these are the parameters of the path. And therefore, everyone, including the church today, must present itself along those lines. And we must make April 12, 2023 a historic turning point where, and what are the characteristics of the democratic agenda. The whole aspect of that menu must be displayed in that situation, attending to all the circumstances demanded by this democratic agenda we need to forge. So leaders of the pro-democracy movement, leaders of all the entire forces that we've identified, the students, the communities, the women organizations, the political organizations, church organizations, all of them must completely forge and completely express a systematic mission that none of us must lack a clarity and understanding of how this way forward can be forged, and must deliberately forge this way forward, and it will drive us into a convergence of unity as the year ends, and we will then identify the critical areas that will emerge that requires our important attention, and must not hesitate as leaders to attend to those situations as they are. And in that way we will be creating a moment or a momentum that confirms that when the pro-democracy movement is in charge of the democratic agenda, it does it in a manner that the agency of a peace declaration of our country, of a completion of the process for democracy, is associated in the method of how we are doing things. So it is important that as we begin the month, clearly as a Communist Party, we are saying we need to invite everyone to focus on that month and look at this shameful half a decade life, and then say through it we can forge and project what we mean by democratic dispensation in the country, and continue to occupy everyone in our country to this mission, and make sure that where there are obstacles, we must have a mechanism of dealing with those obstacles decisively, because it means when we take charge of this situation, we must also be decisive. Without decisiveness, there could be nowhere where we can advance to this course of action, because we are now dealing with a decisive dying system. We must also introduce a decisive emergence of a new dispensation. In that case, we will have honored our history in a correct way. Thank you. Amanda.